Hello everybody and welcome back to the test screening. My name is Chloe.
And my name is Billy.
How are you doing, Billy? How's life?
Life is good, and there's been some interesting stuff that we've seen this week. I'm quite interested to talk about one of the big releases this week, as I feel like we may have some differing opinion here, but it's good. It's good. I'm also very excited for next week's ep because we've got quite a few big releases coming out, but we'll get into those later.
Ooh, you'll be excited. Before we go into the reviews this week, I want to talk a little bit about plot twists and what makes a good twisty-turny shock reveal in a film, because I feel like it's become a bit of a trend recently to kind of put a big twist at the end, and some films do it so much better than others. M. Night Shyamalan's films have become infamous for the ending twist, and some of them work and some of them, no. So I think it'd be a good idea to kind of go through some films that we've enjoyed, have a big twist, and maybe talk about why that twist shocked us. Did we see it coming? Or, you know, I always quite like that dramatic irony thing. You know, when the audience kind of knows what's going to happen before character does, and then it happens, and there's kind of like satisfaction mixed with terror simultaneously. That's like a good cocktail of emotions, I think, to get in a film. I'll let you start off. What are some of your favourite films, or can you think of a film you just thought, holy shit, I was not expecting that?
So, I mean, you can go through a lot of the big heavy hitters and famous films in terms of movie plot twist. You know, Planet of the Apes, which was a massive one for me, which strangely is spoiled by the DVD cover art.
Oh no!
Which, thankfully, I didn't. I think I saw it on TV, or I bought the DVD and didn't look as intently at the DVD cover. But it was really funny. I kind of got to the end of the film, and then of course the amazing final scene happens with the "You blew it up, you maniacs" from Charlton Heston. And then that was amazing and mind blowing as like a 10-year-old. And then I looked back at the DVD cover and I'm like, wait a minute, that spoiled the whole thing. So I'm glad that wasn't ruined for me. All the usual suspects, obviously. But one that I don't think gets talked about enough that is really, really smart is Atonement.
Oh, what a great pick.
Yeah, with I think 2006, 2007, from James McAvoy and Keira Knightley, adapted from the Ian McEwan novel. I think what's so great about that one is just how ruthlessly it pulls the rug out from the audience, from under the audience at the end. I mean, my mum and dad talk about it as being like one of the high watermarks for them in terms of a really, really depressing film. And my dad actually famously took my mum to it for a date.
Oh no!
Back in the late 2000s, because my dad was like, "Oh, period drama, Mandy likes those." And then I don't think either of them were expecting the.
Can we just have a moment of silence for your dad's past? It's just mourn that for a second.
There was a particular moment where he was like, "What have I done?"
Not a film to go and take someone on a date to see. I remember watching that because, I mean, similarly, I went into it not expecting what I got, because I think I was going through a phase of, you know, when you're younger and you get into an actor, or maybe you don't know this, maybe this was a very me thing, I don't know, but you kind of go through their IMDb and you watch every single thing they've ever been in. And during that time, I was a Sherlock fan. And Benedict Cumberbatch is in Atonement in a
yes, he is
a very un-Sherlocky role, and it's such a dark film. But I was quite young when I watched it. I can't remember like when it came out, but I watched it till the end because it completely like drew me in. But I think I was a bit scarred by it. It was like one of those films that really stuck in my mind over the years. I need to rewatch it because I feel like I've blown it out of proportions in my head, but I can remember being really shocked by it.
Yeah, I don't think you've blown it out of proportion at all. I remember watching it with that preconception of how depressing it was that my mum and dad described to me. And I was watching it going, you know, this isn't happy, and this is, you know, pretty sad in places, but towards the end, it's looking like things are going to get resolved, and admittedly it's been quite a turmoil-filled ride up until that point. And then, you get the flash forward and you realise that the film has essentially lied to you for a significant portion of the runtime and gone, and actually, if you get the reveal at the end, you go, actually, no, this wasn't what happened, this was what happened. And you go, Jesus Christ. And it was just suddenly like, it all came crashing down on me like, God almighty, that's... Like, in the last 15 minutes, I'm like, the full depressing weight of the subject matter just, like, fell on top of me. I was like, oh my God.
It is a heck of a final scene. I will give it that. More recent one that I was thinking of, because I also went into this film with wrong like preconception of what the film was. And this is Last Night in Soho. And
oh yes, good one.
I hadn't seen a trailer. I just saw the poster art, and for me, I thought it was some kind of like romance, time travel. The cinematography made it look all very lovely. And boy, was I incorrect. It was a ride. It was really good, but I was not in the mood for a horror that day. It really like took me. It's quite a hard watch. It's quite intense. Last Night in Soho. And that last like scene, the last third, actually, it was just like my heart didn't know what to do. And the reveal at the end of the twist, I was really conflicted about it at the time, because I didn't quite know what it was trying to say with it. It took me a moment of like really thinking about it to try and understand in my mind, because it's been quite throughout the whole film, it's been about this woman being a victim of all of these like horrible male figures. I don't want to reveal the ending, but she gets her own back in a way, but it's not in a way that you expect. And I looking back on it, I like the fact that she wasn't a victim, but also it's such a horrid like scene and reveal, and it's that last like skirmish with the main character that is so tense and horrible. But a great film, a great film. I'd watch it again with like with a better mindset for sure.
Yeah, I think reveals involving characters' identities can sometimes be a tough sell, because it can feel like quite a cheap and easy ploy to go, yes, that person who was in front of your face the entire time, that
was a bit Scooby-Doo
person, and they were responsible.
Yeah, the Scooby-Doo.
Yes, they were responsible for all the mayhem. It can feel like it's only a shade or two above that. But there is a great amount of pleasure in a twist that when you look back on it, it seems so obvious, and yet the film misdirected you enough and chucked enough red herrings in front of you that or it maybe occurred to you for like a brief moment, what if that? No, that's not what's happening. And then actually it is. It's like, you feel like you've been hoodwinked a little bit, and that's quite satisfying. And I totally get what you mean about Last Night in Soho being quite disturbing. I mean, I'm not easily shaken by horror films. I'm a seasoned veteran of extreme French and Asian horror cinema, which are particularly hardcore. And there were moments in Last Night in Soho that had me gripping the sides of my chair a little bit. But I also kind of love the thematic thing about, even though obviously one character is revealed to be a villain in that reveal, there is kind of this weird sort of kind of slightly kind of sinister, but also kind of hopeful and kind of satisfyingly, in a kind of warped way, positive connection that's maintained between these two characters in that very final scene, with sort of the wink into the reflection at the mirror. I really like that, and what it kind of, even though there is kind of a shade of darkness there, what it kind of says about female solidarity in that industry, that the fashion and film industry that Last Night in Soho looks at. One last plot twist I would like to mention is a very recent one. We reviewed it a couple episodes ago. Was Bodies.
Okay.
And you haven't seen this yet, so I don't want to spoil it. But the great thing about that twist is that you're kind of expecting a certain kind of reveal, and then actually the reveal that happens is not at all what you're expecting, and actually it casts this really sort of just ludicrous, oh, look at how stupid you all are, air over the whole sort of proceedings and chaos that has gone up until that point. And actually, if you were to describe the twist on paper, it sounds like it would be a massive letdown, and just not satisfying or a shock at all. But actually, the reason it really, really works is that it totally plays into how vapid and self-obsessed the characters are. That actually, one, it's kind of like really sardonic and humorous in how needless it reveals the chaos to be, but it also kind of shows, it makes perfect sense because of course these people who, and how vapid we've been shown, the film's shown them to be, would do or think something like this. And that to me was very satisfying. And my mum's not a massive horror fan, and she watched Bodies with me and was kind of like squirming a little bit at some of the tense parts, but actually we got to the end and we were kind of just laughing, going, that was a really smart ending.
I'm just thinking of, okay, I'm fully aware this is an appalling twist. It's really bad. But when I was 12 years old, it blew my tiny mind. And it was Now You See Me.
Oh no!
I know, I'm ashamed, but at the time, it doesn't. It don't. I fully agree. I fully agree with you. You know what? I've seen that film since, and it's bad. It's really. It's not a good film. But when I was 12, it was the best thing I'd ever seen. Honestly, I was obsessed with it. I don't know why. I think I liked card tricks and magic and things like that. I was kind of getting into that age, but I was like, when that twist is pulled at the end, and I don't even mind spoiling this for people. It's been out since 2013, but when Mark Ruffalo is revealed to be the magician, I was like, what? That's insane. But looking back on it, they had done absolutely nothing to tease that up until that point, and it made zero sense that he'd been chasing these guys around the country. The whole thing just doesn't make sense. It's a bad film. But I was very entertained by it.
Yeah, that's the thing about twists. You can't go for what in theory on paper would be the most shocking thing, because it's actually, does that thing make sense, or can you make it make narrative sense and kind of sow the seeds for it? Because, like I said, something like Bodies on paper, or particularly Last Night in Soho, may seem, on paper may seem, oh come on, that's crazy. But actually, when you look back, the breadcrumbs, particularly with Last Night in Soho, and Edgar Wright's great at this, with little references and little Easter eggs that really tie the whole screenplays of his films together. And you look back and go, yeah, that does actually make sense. That was kind of staring us in the face, and you look back and you see the little clues. Whereas, there's absolutely none of that in Now You See Me. It's like, it totally foregoes any sort of logical foreshadowing, and then just expects you to buy this ludicrous reveal at the end. It's like, no, actually, we're not that.
Have you seen?
As audiences.
Have you seen Now You See Me too?
No, I couldn't bring myself to put myself through a sequel to that abomination.
Well, I mean, I'm waiting for the third one, which they will no doubt call Now You Three Me, and at that point we'll all be dead.
Yeah. At that point, I will have gone into like a World War II style bomb bunker, like a silo, to try and escape the possibility of me having to go and see this film and review it here.
Oh no, if they bring out Now You See Me 3, I am dragging you to the cinema. We're going to see it together. But you know what? We'll do it with alcohol. That'll make everything better.
Yes, it 100% will. Feel the pain.
Okie dokie. I feel like we should move on to the first review, and this is Guardians of the Galaxy Vol.3, and I'm really excited to talk to you about this. In my opinion, this is one of the best Marvel films we've had in a long, long time. From the sounds of it, you may disagree, but before we get into it, just tell us what is it about? How does it lead on from the previous Guardians of the Galaxy films? What's our in point?
So, Our end point is that with Avengers Endgame, we saw the death and resurrection of Gamora, that has Zoe Saldana's character, who now obviously has retained none of her previous memories and such. Chris Pratt's character, has lost his sort of romantic relationship with her because she doesn't remember any of that. So he is sort of in a state of disrepair and depression about that. But then, in amongst his own sort of feelings of turmoil around that, and the team kind of splitting at the seams, they kind of have to rally and defend the universe again, because there is a new villain called the High Evolutionary. Such a pretentious name for a villain, but he has a sort of very prominent past sort of feud and conflict with Rocket that has now sort of reared its head again as he's trying to sort of form sort of new universes and kind of in a semi-Thanos kind of way, shape the existing humans and animals in sort of warped, sort of in inverted commas, improved versions of humankind and animal kind as well. And Rocket is injured as part of this and sort of close to death, and they must go on a mission to both stop the High Evolutionary and save Rocket from death. Really, that's the main sort of plot thrust of Volume 3.
So I'm going to already start disagreeing with you.
Did I mess up some details there?
Well, okay, in my mind, they don't set out to save the universe.
Well, no, it's more setting out to save Rocket, really.
Yeah, so Rocket gets injured. They try and save him by using a med pack, but they find in the process of trying to save him that he has a kill switch inbuilt in him. And the only way that they can reverse this and save their friend is to find out more from his creator, which leads them to the, what's his name? High Evolutionary? Revolutionary?
Yes, that's
the High Evolutionary. Yeah. They go out in search of the High Evolutionary and kind of, in a very Guardians way, kind of adjacently saving the universe from this threat, but it wasn't what they originally set out to do.
Yes,
that's the distinction that I would make.
Yes, that's a much better distinction.
So, okay. A lot of this film takes place in flashback, and we learn more about Rocket Raccoon, who's been one of the more kind of mysterious characters in the MCU. There was a scene in the first one where he takes his shirt off in the prison, and Quill kind of casts an eye over him, and we've never really touched on much of his backstory since. I think there was like a drunken rant that he went on in the second one as well. He's always come across as quite a tragic character, as all of the Guardians have, to be honest. I think that's one of the appeals, for me at least, is that they're all kind of broken, and there's none of this kind of false Captain American-y smiles and, superhero-y preppiness that comes with some of the movies. I've always liked the fact that they're perpetually underdogs. And, okay, I want to get your opinion on flashbacks, because I feel like there's two movies here, and one of them is the flashbacks, and one of them is this kind of present day fight with the High Evolutionary that the Guardians go on. So we'll kind of split it into two. So what did you think of the backstory stuff?
I wasn't a fan. Now, I really question the narrative logic and the soundness of the choice to bring Rocket's tragic backstory out of the woodwork and into the Guardian sort of mythos at this point, when we're at the third entry and we're coming towards the conclusion of the trilogy and sort of the rounding up of the arcs for the group. Why are we focusing so intently in on one character when that sort of maybe potentially does a disservice to a satisfying conclusion to the arc of the entire group? And I appreciate very much the more personal stakes it injects into the action and the attempt to try and do something different here. But I think it led to a plot that felt to me kind of strangely unfocused and muddled from a character development standpoint, because it was, jumping between too many different strands that I don't think were deeply connected enough. And I didn't actually think there was enough narrative meat to carry the 2 hour and 20-minute runtime. That felt far too long to me. And there were also these very heavy turns into quite dark and twisted territory with Rocket's backstory. And again, I really like the fact they were trying to take a risk here and do something markedly different tonally from previous Guardians entries and MCU entries in general. But it really fell flat for me on an emotional engagement level, because the humor and the playful spark that's normally such a joyful part of the Guardians films and why we like them so much, that also balances out the weightier dramatic sequences, that was very diminished here. And this meant for me that there was not nearly sufficient enough of a tonal balancing act that would have made the big emotional peaks as moving as intended. And it just meant that the film felt generally pretty dour throughout. And it meant that the violent and quite brutal events from Rocket's past actually rang quite sour for me here. I really wanted there to be a quite, an element of tortured past about it, but also quite a triumphant end for the group. And I felt it went too hard in the direction of, trying to put the audience through the dark emotional ringer.
I'm not sure. So I get what you're saying, but I think for me, I've been so tired of the Marvel formula at the moment that I was actually pleasantly surprised at the direction that this installment was taking it. And I was like, finally, we're actually going to double down on a character. And it wasn't one of the expected characters. I think we've done pretty much everything we can do with Quill at this point. And I actually think that his story wrapped up really well here. I thought that this was a good final chapter for Quill. I know that he'll be back, but I did feel like this was a good ending to kind of his arc with the Guardians. And I actually was really satisfied with how it all came together in the end. There are some really disturbing moments with Rocket's backstory where you kind of see the torture that he went through, and there's some really quite disturbing moments of like animal abuse and the conditions that they're living with, and you kind of know as soon as you're introduced to some of these other characters that it's not going to be a very happy ending for them. So I think in a way that's one criticism that I would have, was I knew instantly that some of these characters weren't going to make it, and they did insist on dragging that out as long as they could. But it still hit me, and the conclusion came to pass. I also really enjoyed the villain, again, because it's like I thought he was a bit of something different. I know that he's still planning on world domination, aren't they all? But I did enjoy his almost like bipolar, shouty, scary. I was intimidated by this guy, and it was almost more sinister the way that he interacted with Rocket as an almost father figure and then disregarded him so easily. I thought that there was a real creepiness to him that I enjoyed. I thought he was more memorable than a lot of the villains that we've had recently with Marvel. And I think that the great thing, I know we'll probably disagree on that, but like the great thing that that we've got with the Guardians is that we already know all of the characters so well, because they've been so well established in previous installments. And I still thought that there were a few moments of light here. I did laugh out loud a few times. It's not as much as the other two. For me, there were little moments of light, and it's quite a gross movie. There's a lot of like, not like bloody gore, but like gory as in just ew in the film. And because I'm a child, a lot of that did amuse me. So I'm just like, there's a massive spaceship that looks like an anus. That is hilarious. So but my sense of humor's on the floor. You don't have to do a lot to impress me. But I did find that it didn't have to be as quippy as the last ones. I was happy to see a Marvel film take a risk. It felt like a James Gunn film more than a Marvel film, which I appreciated. It was definitely Marvel. That all of the Marvel staples are there. What I've always enjoyed about the Guardians films is that they feel like they have an individual voice behind them. And say what you will about James Gunn, but I kind of applaud his, tenacity with this to kind of keep his characters in character and to create his own little universe within the universe. And yeah, so I really enjoyed it. I get what you're saying. It's not like happy watch. It's not an easy watch like some of the other Marvel films were. It's not what you'd expect. Sorry, someone's messaging me. Shush. It's not what you'd expect from a Guardians film. I was, instead of being like shocked and disappointed, I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I was on the James Gunn thing. It feels very much like his voice is driving this. And, I've said in the past that I would always rather a big franchise film, or just a film in general, takes a big swing and a miss rather than kind of plays it safe and is so sort of assembly line like something like Shang-Chi. So I very much applaud the risk taking here. And I think just in the case of this, it didn't really gel with the. And I know it's maybe not intending to be like the other two, but I think it went so far in a direction that I wasn't expecting, and it didn't retain, quite enough of the original charm from the other two to sort of balance out that, those very kind of relentlessly sort of depressing sequences. But in the end, I was really satisfied with where the characters ended up. Their overall arcs is a really great Florence and the Machine inclusion at the end, and that bit at the end when you sort of got the resolution that made a lot of logical sense for their characters and their personalities. That touched me.
I also really appreciated the ending with Gamora.
Yes,
I really appreciated that they didn't do the thing I thought they were going to do,
no.
and they went with a different direction with her, and it was just fun. I really enjoyed having Gamora back on old form in this film.
Yeah, that's like the top point on my notes. The fact that I really loved the fact that they didn't go for the sappy resolution I'm sure a lot of people wanted. They gave us what the characters in the group needed, rather than what some people may necessarily have wanted out of that. And I, considering that Endgame was about ticking, and that's not necessarily a criticism of Endgame. Considering that film was such a celebratory ticking of so many narrative boxes, I like the fact that they kind of didn't bend to what some fans might have wanted out of that relationship here. So I really like that. Just and also that action sequence with the CGI aided long take set to the Beastie Boys' No Sleep Till Brooklyn is one of the most badass things I've seen at the cinema this year, and it just put a massive smile on my face being a long-time Beastie Boys fan, and that was great. On the topic of the villain, this is probably the point we're going to disagree the most on. I think he's one of the worst villains the MCU has ever had. I hated him. Whenever he came on screen, I could not wait for him to be gone. I think he's so, just on a performance level, I think he's so shriekingly obnoxious and grating in how pompous he is that, he's just so intensely irritating. And for me, not
the point.
Yeah, but like you can have someone who's really slimy and irritating, but also kind of entertainingly so. But here I just found it got on my nerves to the point where like this is not enjoyable or entertaining for me to watch on screen. And he's not at all fear or tension inducing. He's about as imposing as a petulant toddler. And I think that's made worse by the fact that his wider motivations are a really cookie cutter, lazy rehash of some of the plans that Thanos had, with minimal real changes. And I also think the fact that so much of his rage stems from a really petty grievance he has with Rocket, just undermines a lot of the central conflict for me. And yeah, I think they really, really messed up with the villain on this one, and that hurt the film a lot for me.
I thought he was one of the most interesting ones we've had in a while. I don't know. I feel like yes, he could be grating. I didn't find him that grating. Don't know why, but I just didn't. I was more because he was such a powerful character. Found his like pettiness almost. Oh, it's like he doesn't have anything better to do. No one can challenge him, so he can just kind of do. He makes and breaks civilizations, however he wants, and that kind of attitude that's come along with it. And I like the fact that we'd seen him be, reconstructed, and his grievance was almost vanity, which I thought was quite interesting. That's what differentiated him from Thanos for me, whereas Thanos kind of, had this, air of I'm doing the right thing. I feel like this guy, he knew he wasn't doing the right thing. He just could. And I was like, ooh, that's villainy. That's that's like twirly mustachio, and I kind of enjoyed that.
Twirly twirly mustachio. That's very funny. And sure, I can see that, but to me that just reads a very limp justification for the villainy, which doesn't quite fly with me. But that's just me.
That's fair enough. You know what? Agree to disagree. We can't always be on the same page.
Yeah, no, I didn't hate it. I also think that I don't really, even with the more personal angle, I think in the wider context of the MCU, I'm not sure if how much it actually justifies its existence, especially considering the long run time. And yeah, I mean, I think the last Ant-Man film felt more consequential in the MCU
Oh,
than
take that back.
I'm sorry. But then again,
No.
I also see that this is trying to take a more personal, character-centric angle. So, like, I appreciate that they're kind of trying to do different things, even if I do stand by that
I
comment.
would much rather have a film that's better in its own self-contained universe than anything that really loosely tries to justify its existence in the wider MCU. That's kind of where I'm at with it at the moment.
Yeah.
I would take Guardians over Ant-Man any day. There is so much more personality to it.
Yeah,
I think Kang's a worse villain. Kang is a terrible villain. He's just boring.
I don't know.
No, Kang is worse. He's so dull, and I groaned when I saw that end scene, and we're like, oh, we're getting more of this guy.
Yeah,
It's I'm like, I don't want.
I did too.
So I think this is a massive step up. I thought that this at least gives us something to talk about with the MCU, where a lot of the films that have come out recently have just been so bland that you can't even really have a post cinema discussion with anyone about them. You're like, oh, did you see when the guy did the thing? Yes, that's it. That's the end.
Yeah, I would sooner have a debate like this with you than just come on and go, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. So you know what? At least it's got some meat on the bones, and
Yeah,
that I hope that we get more films in the MCU that have a bit of a personality behind them. I hope that they see the success of this trilogy and they allow directors to do a little bit more of their own thing with them.
true. I hope so too. Final rating for this with me would be a C plus. I'm kind of in the middle on it, but and it's probably towards the lower echelon of MCU films for me if I'm kind of thinking of my previous ratings of MCU entries. But like I said, I'm pleased that it's doing something different, which the MCU can certainly take a feather out of James Gunn's book for.
I'd give it a B plus. I thought it was great, but I'm not going to rush and rewatch it.
That's fair. That's fair.
Okay, so moving on, and this one you're on your own. I've left you now, and you must continue without me. Because this one is Return to Seoul, which I've not seen and know nothing about. So take it away, Billy.
So this is an international co-production. It was the official entry for Cambodia for the 2023 Best International Feature Film. Oscar centers around a 25-year-old adopted French woman of original like Korean descent from her biological parents. She, on a total whim, actually, due to a flight cancellation for a holiday, ends up going back to Seoul in Korea. And while she's there, she really just because because why not, decides to go to the adoption agency that she was left with as a very very young child and seek out her biological parents. And it's how both about how she reconnects with her biological parents in other parts of Korea, and also how she sort of explains that life change to her French parents who are back in Paris. But also we get the sense that she's quite an introspective and also somewhat pained soul, but she has a quite mischievous and bright-eyed, quality to her as well. She's a bit of a hellraiser, so she's a really, really interesting character. And the film takes place over really the best part of a decade. There's sort of several large time jumps, and we see that her identity is in a state of flux. And as she goes through these very significant changes in her life, we sort of see her start to change and, sort of for lack of a better term, try on different versions of herself and try to figure out who she is, and how who she is now sort of relates and contrasts with who are maybe her biological and adopted parents intended for her to be. So quite interesting subject matter being portrayed there. A quite attention-grabbing point about the background of the film's production is that the story of Freddie, who's the name of the central female character, was inspired by a friend of the director's and her reconnection with her adopted parents. But Ji-min Park, who was cast in the role, was a friend of that person the director knew. He was introduced to Park and was told that she had never acted before. She'd never worked in this field, and he believed she carried a certain quality of the free-spirited nature of the character. And he approached her and said, "Do you want to be in this film?" And she said yes, despite having no prior acting experience. And they began a period of intense collaboration where they built out the character and sort of challenged each other's notions on who Freddie was and how that character would act in these situations. And they sort of in an aggressive or toxic way, sort of like brushed up against each other, as intense collaboration kind of brings, and sort of challenged each other's opinions about how the character would react. And what has then emerged as a result of this collaboration is a really fine-tuned character study. And the director leaves a lot of room in the edit, the pace, and the framing of scenes for the very nuanced performances and character work to kind of take center stage. You get these really kind of pulled back, static angles that just kind of like let the dialogue exchanges sort of breathe between the characters, and we're not getting particularly flashy camera work. It's really just all sort of focus put on the performers. And it's really, really remarkable that Ji-min Park had no prior acting experience before she performed here, because she's so incredibly natural on screen. And the character of Freddie feels fully lived in. And despite the substantial time jumps, sometimes 1 year, 5 years, 2 years, the film taking place over the course of this 10-year period, you get the sense of that development and shift in her personality over time, despite the sort of jumps in the chronology. Park feels as though she is fully inhabiting the character without externalizing those deeply complex emotions through these fake large performative gestures. She's able to convey so much through a single organic facial expression, and that's really impressive from any actor, let alone a first time performer. I think for her performance alone, the film is worth seeing. The writing also foregoes quite a bit of the wider context of Freddie's life, but I think the film carries this off because Park's performance is so detailed, and the film paints Freddie in this very kind of beguilingly enigmatic light and keeps her past draped in this compelling layer of mystery that doesn't feel as though it obscures the character development or makes the character study obtuse from a narrative or thematic perspective. It makes you want to find out more about this person and keeps you intrigued and keeps you sort of gripped in her personal journey. I did feel that the general filmmaking approach to the story held the drama back somewhat from being as impactful or engrossing as I think it could have been. that very spacious, steady, patient, and almost kind of passive directorial approach that isn't as involved and just sort of lets the actors do their thing and do a lot of the heavy lifting story-wise. That passive approach to shooting the dialogue scenes with very little interference from the camera. It was so muted at times that I did find portions of Return to Seoul to be quite patience testing. And given that part of the story centers around the fluctuation of her identity, and that there is a mischievous side to her character, I did feel as though there was a missed opportunity to have the filmmaking take on more of a vibrant, shape-shifting quality that echoes her fluctuating sense of self. There are flashes of this, like there's a really good scene in a bar when she talks to the DJ and requests this really pounding techno song, and you get this sort of very kind of extended sort of close-up long take that lasts for a couple full minutes of her sort of very sort of propulsively dancing around this bar space. She's the only one dancing in the bar, and we're very sort of close in on her as she's sort of having this moment of euphoria. And that spark of kinetic energy is quite invigorating, considering the stillness we've become accustomed to up until this point in the general feel of the drama. But it's a shame then that the rest of the film doesn't capitalize on that. I feel like there could have been, some real filmmaking fireworks that could have, elevated the character drama and development even more as well. But I think on its own, I did appreciate the subtle approach and the fact that it's not trying to, it's trying to prove very natural and let the character growth sort of spool forward naturally. And I did appreciate that. I just feel like more stylistic risks could have been taken here that weren't capitalized on in those brief flashes we talked about. But I still think it's a solid drama and has a really dynamite central performance at the center of it. I would give this a B. I like this.
And moving on now to our next review, and you're going to have to help me with the pronunciation here. So is this Pamfir?
Yeah, Pamfir.
Pamfir. Ah, look at me. I'm on a roll. Yeah, so Pamfir. What is it? What's it about? Let us know.
I'm not even going to try and pronounce the director's name. My God, I've just looked at it. But this is a Ukrainian drama. It was actually made really close to the start of the conflict in Ukraine, which is kind of interesting and adds sort of a layer of sort of thematic dark clouds over proceedings, which sort of adds an interesting tonal layer over it. But it's about a father who comes back from a lengthy prison sentence and comes back to his sort of rural and agricultural family, who are, the son goes to church and are very upstanding members of the community. He has quite, high aspirations, very loving and doting wife, good solid relationship with his brother and his mother. The problem is, and he seems quite a warm, empathetic, like this loving character as well, and very kind of upstanding father in terms of the aspirations and his very respectful and loving treatment of his son and how he wants him to aspire to great things and he wants to help nurture that. The issue is that he obviously was in prison, and that is because he has a past history with smuggling contraband across the Romanian border for an organised crime syndicate. And due to the lack of money and sort of financial hardship his family are in, and also the fact that he needs to appease the local crime boss because his son inadvertently sort of falls foul of him in a sort of an accidental incident, he takes on the one last sort of job trope, one last smuggling job across the border. And this sort of throws the family into a state of, conflict and disrepair and dysfunction, and potentially threatens his own freedom and the safety of his own family, and, throws at the prospect of him potentially going back to prison. The interesting thing about Pamfir, in relation to my thoughts on Return to Seoul, actually, is that the inverse of my reservations with Return to Seoul essentially happened here with the experience of watching Pamfir. As the cool thing about seeing films week in, week out in close proximity to each other, as we do here, because you kind of notice these links that weren't at all intentional, but, the experience of watching one film can interestingly inform how you critique another. The direction and cinematography in Pamfir is really excellent, and it's particularly impressive when you consider that this is the director's debut feature. It reminded me a lot of Gus Van Sant's Palme d'Or-winning drama Elephant, which is about the Columbine shooting from 2003. The film being set in 2003, not the shooting. In the sense that both in terms of the tone, the general, grave sort of foreboding atmosphere, and also the fact that each scene is shot in one extended and very gracefully choreographed Steadicam long take. And despite the fact that the film essentially uses the same shooting technique for every scene, it's able to lend a subtly distinct shade of atmosphere to each different sequence, which I thought was quite sophisticated in, how the director was able to judge that. The closeness of a pushing on an intimately warm embrace between family members in solidarity or in romantic affection. The balletic attacks of this large-scale hand-to-hand brawl, which is particularly impressive considering it's shot in one take and has a lot of participants in the fight. The foreboding trip down a long corridor towards impending danger. There's a moment of panic when family members are unable to find someone in danger in a very sort of large-scale crowd situation. How the director is able to map the long take aesthetic over the tone of these different sequences shows a great degree of stylistic judgment and sophistication that I thought should very much be commended. It also serves as a good reminder as to why I love more involved camera movement in drama like this, because it can emphasize the blocking and shifting spatial relationships, and how showing the changing relationship between the actors and characters it shouldn't just always be hanged on the performances, but can also be shown through how you lens a scene or how you move through a scene, and how that movement shifts is, I think, in some cases so much easier to convey when you have you're not cutting, you're actually having a camera physically move through the space and push in and zoom in on particular facial expressions or character movements at a particular point. This is helped a lot by a very complex and sympathetic central performance from Alexander Yat-Sintiuk, who gives a terrific combination of familial warmth, but also this gruff and brutish criminality to a deeply conflicted man. He also has a very sort of empathetic everyman quality to him. He's a very good central protagonist who you get on side with quite easily, while also seeing sort of the knotty complexity within his predicament. These are all very admirable characteristics. So a lot of critics have showered a lot of praise on Pamfir, and the points that they're picking up on and sort of praising are points that, I've already mentioned, and ones that I do very much see and agree with. But there are some, for me, filmmaking technicalities and script technicalities that I think are holding the drama back from, really reaching into that higher echelon that a lot of critics are placing it in, and also just maybe dulling the full effect of those, praiseworthy characteristics of the film. And I think that even with the central, the strength of the central performance, the inner conflict that character is written with, the rustic atmosphere, the subtle sense of menace, the technical prowess of the camera work, and the moral ambiguity of the subject matter, I do still think the plot is fairly conventional by crime drama standards, with the criminal who wants to go on the straight and narrow, has a second chance at life, but then he's roped in for one last job, and it throws the family into a state of sort of disrepair and chaos. This is fairly well-worn dramatic territory for this style of film, and I don't think Pamfir in the end does a whole lot to differentiate itself narratively from a lot of its contemporaries in this genre. And there's also the limitations of this sort of style of cinematography that does start to set in after a while, and you do begin to notice it. Considering there isn't a lot of editing variation due to the length of the takes, comprising whole scenes that last several minutes, this means that the film as a whole doesn't have a tremendous amount of variation in mood and tension. There is some of that variation, like in the point I mentioned previously, but for large portions, the film tonally and pacing-wise does hang firmly in this sort of middling plateau that doesn't exactly arrest or grip from a viewing perspective, past a certain degree. And I think more contrast in the tension levels could have made the increasing danger of the story more prevalent and even more compelling. But I do think on that sort of baseline level of that crime drama, well-worn story, I do think that this is decently well executed. And I think there's a lot of directorial finesse and prowess on display here, which is really good to see. I wanted something that was, and I can certainly take the limitations of the cinematography because I feel like the director is doing something sort of distinct and sort of visionary here. My main wish was that the script was more adventurous with this subject matter. But I do still think it's solid. It's got a great final shot. I mean, really terrific final frame. And it was impactful in quite a lot of moments. And, performance is solid and technicals were on point a lot of the time. So I would give this another B. I think this is solid and a big win for Ukrainian drama as well.
I feel like you're like entering your dark side era. We haven't had any A's this week so far. This is Billy's sixth era.
Oh well, the final film may bring an end to that, but we shall see. But it hasn't been as uniformly positive this week as some others.
Okay, well let's break that trend then. So this last one's called The Age of Innocence, and it sounds like we're going to have a bit of sunshine with this one at the end.
We are going to have some sunshine with this. So this is a reissue of 1993 period drama from none other than Martin Scorsese. This has been reissued for its 30th anniversary costume drama starring Daniel Day-Lewis, Michelle Pfeiffer, Winona Ryder. Even has small sort of supporting turns from Miriam Margolyes and Richard E. Grant.
Cast.
Yes, it's got a very stacked cast. And there's Stuart Wilson as well, and Terry Cook. Really, a lot of acting, particularly British acting royalty, on display here, which is great to see. Plot centers around sort of 19th century New York high society. There's a young lawyer who is engaged to the cousin of his friend. They're seemingly very happy and very upstanding in society. He's a very respected sort of gentleman, both in his profession and on a personal level. He's on very good terms with his fiance's family. The woman's cousin is a friend of his, and she is sort of seeking her freedom after having separated from her husband, which of course at this time in history was utterly scandalous. You just didn't do this. And she's sort of bringing shame upon the family, but, as is absolutely her right and a lot more freely accepted in today's society, she's trying to move away from this toxic relationship and find her own freedom and autonomy as a woman. But, society just doesn't want that to happen. And he falls in love with her. He'd started trying to help her with the purest of intentions and eventually, develop stronger romantic feelings for her. And it's really a sort of tale of the conflict in high society and a real call to arms for people to have, their own say in who they love without the fear of repercussions from sort of societal expectations. And since it is a Martin Scorsese film, and one I've been meaning to watch for a long time, it's not really the kind of subject matter you necessarily expect him to go for, a high society, period costume drama. It's not something we'd immediately associate with him and his usual brand of, epic crime dramas. But, I'm sure it will come as a surprise to no one that he carries off this style of narrative with his usual level of cinematic mastery. Despite the fact that it predates the film by a couple of years, this film actually, Age of Innocence came out in 1993, the film I'm about to mention came out in 95. But the film in his catalogue this reminded me the most of, interestingly, was Casino. It has a similar penchant for these long narration-heavy sections that are laying out the rules of the societal and business landscape that the characters and transactions, social and financial, are operating in. Whereas the narrator-laden flashbacks from something like Goodfellas are more squarely from the viewpoint of the protagonist and their own personal feelings on the environment that they're in. Casino and The Age of Innocence, they more kind of generally survey the wider societal and familial mechanisms that allow the characters to maintain the privileged existences that they have. In that sense, The Age of Innocence is really enticingly novelistic. Scorsese's propensity for these very intricately choreographed long takes, kind of like the Copacabana from Goodfellas, they bring the audience here through the inner workings of a large operation or inside a building or a function or a party or a wedding that's on full display and in the grandest of fashion. Seeing the camera so magnificently weave through the inner workings of a group interaction, detailing the various layers of social ballet and behavioral pageantry that are enacted in order to maintain these pristine outward-facing appearances. It's such a joy to witness on screen and see it so fluidly happen in, one extended, beautifully directed sequence, and how all the various actors sort of intersect and bisect each other's conversations, and it's almost like a dance in how they're maintaining all of this. The production design and costumes and set dressing, it will come as no surprise to say that, considering this is a period drama, they are absolutely to die for. Seeing the camera glide over the most perfectly presented dinner table and roster of food, while you hear the most elegantly worded, novel-esque narration you've ever heard, detailing the social forethought that has gone into this display and what it implies about the family putting it on. It's mouth-wateringly enjoyable storytelling. I just got a massive kick out of all of it. And because for this reason, it shouldn't be surprising at all that Scorsese's directorial style is, as well suited to a class-focused period piece as it is to a brutal and blunt mafia drama. I do think, because of these narrations and long take, sequences and these montages, I do think there was a danger to me that I felt early on in The Age of Innocence, that these sequences are so frequent and there is so much narration. I would say that it comprises a bulk of the film's initial 40 minutes or so. I did wonder if the film would lose its way and forego actually drilling down into the specific personal struggles of these characters, and how they exist within the societal machine. I thought maybe the narration and big montages would sort of paint over the characters rather than sort of digging, underneath their skin and who they are and their own feelings about these environments. And that thankfully didn't end up being the case. Daniel Day-Lewis's performance, unsurprisingly, is wonderful. One of the greatest actors that ever graced the screen. There's such well-mannered and suave class in his manner of speaking, but when it comes to his interactions with Michelle Pfeiffer's character, his body language and changes in speech, in speech cadence, they convey so much repressed pain and longing. And Michelle Pfeiffer also breaks your heart with her emotional suffering at the hands of society and her family's expectations of her. That radiant and earnest desire to be loved, cherished, and free. It shines so brightly through her performance, but there's also sort of a sense of weariness and having been ground down by so much disdain towards her on wide societal level. She gets that antithesis of emotions really, really brilliantly. And to me, this is one of the most well-written and insightful examinations of how destructive society's grip on romantic relationships and love and marriage at this time was. That the film is able to show it so strong visually through those party sequences and long takes I mentioned earlier, and through narration and through quiet character interaction, is really brilliant. The score is really gorgeous as well. Really sort of helps accentuate the emotion of particular character interactions, but doesn't hang too highly in the mix or push that too prominently. As far as complaints go, they're very minor, really. Most of the editing from the great Thelma Schumacher is immaculate, of a very high caliber. However, there are a couple of very weird, sort of jittery, dissolve-laden transitions with very pronounced sort of zooms and quick pans, particularly in these sort of stage sequences. There's a recurring thing where they go and see this one particular play, and in those sequences, the editing is kind of, weirdly jagged, and that to me was quite jarring and felt out of place. But these are very few and far between. That's a really minor grievance. And on a script level, there is obviously a central conflict between Daniel Day-Lewis's burgeoning love for Michelle Pfeiffer that causes friction with his established engagement to Winona Ryder's character. And I do feel like Winona Ryder is given a somewhat short shrift in terms of screen time, which doesn't leave that push-pull dynamic and conflict feeling as potent as I think it could have been. But the interplay between Michelle Pfeiffer and Daniel Day-Lewis is so strong that it does mostly make up for that. I was left wanting a little bit more from that, but it wasn't a massive disservice to the drama overall.
You always want a little bit more Winona Ryder.
Of course, every film would just be better if it had a little bit more Winona Ryder. But yeah, that her getting short shrift was made up for by how achingly moving the tragic inability for Day-Lewis and Pfeiffer to be together was. Overall, I would say this is another real classic in Martin Scorsese's filmography. Because of the visual grandeur, I'm really glad I got to see it on the big screen. And if the reissue is still playing near you, I would definitely seek it out. I would give this an A.
Yay, we got an A.
Yeah, we got an A.
Not a recent A, but it's an A. It's an A nonetheless. So
it's an old-timey A.
So what's coming up next week, Billy? We've got some big releases next week.
Oh, we've got such a mix next week. I'm very excited to talk about these. So we've got the new big epic 3-hour horror comedy drama from Ari Aster, one of my favourite directors working in horror today. Beau is Afraid. Really excited for that one, given how polarising the response to it has been so far. We've got utter mayhem and, petrol-fueled madness in Fast and Furious 10. We're going to see if I have lost all hope with this franchise or if I can still find some form of entertainment with it.
You know what? You're on your own with that one. I won't be tuning in.
You're done. You're done.
I was done from the first one.
Oh. No, well, I have sort of a certain sentimental from secondary school friends and all that.
We'll have a redemption arc with this. Maybe. There's still hope.
I somehow doubt it, but I do hope. We have another Martin Scorsese reissue with his classic Raging Bull coming back to cinemas. It will be the first time I've seen it in 9 or 10 years, which is really great that I get to re-experience it on the big screen. One of his greatest masterpieces. And we have the seemingly very moving and emotional Still, a Michael J. Fox film, the documentary about his career and fight with Parkinson's, which I'm very interested to see a more detailed examination of his life and struggle with that.
I'm excited to watch that one. I think I've seen some bits about it, and Michael J. Fox is one of my favourite actors. It's just like, growing up with the films that all of your parents watched, and he was in a lot. He was in a lot of those films. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to see, to learn a bit more about him and his life away from the screen. So
cornerstone.
Very exciting.
He's a cornerstone of my childhood.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you once again for your reviews, Billy, and I look forward to all of those lovely picks next week. If you are listening to us on Amazon or on Apple Podcasts, please give us a review. We'd love to hear what you think, or even ways that we can improve. And don't forget to like and subscribe on Instagram and TikTok. We'll be back next week. Bye.
Thank you very much for listening. Bye.